that piquancy at the back of the throat, which is caused by the polyphenols. And the polyphenols are at their highest level immediately after pressing. And thereafter, they will begin to decline gently throughout the natural life of an olive oil. But I mean, there are many polyphenol levels that go up to 700, 800, 900, even 1,000. Wow. Those will tend to decline slowly over a period, not just of 1 year, but they can be perfectly in good quality 2 years. But ideally, the real key message with olive oil is freshest is best. And in which case, as you rightly point out, you are likely to be coughing a little bit, but it's a pleasant cough to know that it's actually doing you good. And I haven't had a cold really since I started to taste olive oil.
Oh my, that's an added benefit. Fascinating people with stories to share, fabulous wines and the best local foods to accompany them, and beautiful places to discover and visit. All of this and more on Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on the Italian Wine Podcast. Join me for a new episode every Tuesday. Welcome to Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on Italian Wine Podcast. Today we travel to Oxford to meet my guest, Nancy Gilchrist, Master of Wine, Certified Olive Oil Sommelier and Olive Oil Specialist, and educator and communicator. Good morning, Nancy. Many thanks for being my guest today. We met some time ago, maybe a year or two ago, when I attended one of your master classes in London on the wines of Alto Adige and Etna. I think Grana Padano cheese was thrown into that mix.
That's right. Yeah, it was an unusual combination, but I thought a really genius mixture of the parameters that govern two of the most interesting regions of Italy, namely altitude, which of course you find in the foothills of the Alps in Alto Adige, and the altitude surrounding Mount Etna, so the volcano on Sicily. And they brought out some fascinating combinations, comparisons and contrasts. And then the fact that they were also combined with the integration of cheese, of Parmigiano, was also interesting because of the level of acidity and the combination of salt and acidity in food and wine. So there were a lot of different angles and dimensions to it, which I thought made for an interesting focus.
It did indeed, and I was really fascinated and really enjoyed the way you brought those two regions we don't think of in the same breath usually. We're going from the far north, the Alps, the Dolomites, vineyards, and alpine vineyards, down to the most active volcano in Europe, the slopes of Etna. And you're right, Nancy, actually that Grana cheese, the Grana Padano, that crumbliness, the saltiness, the acidity was the perfect food to enjoy with both wines, with both of the wines from those areas.
Well, it is one of the interesting understandings or truths about the interaction of food and wine is that acidity in food helps to reduce the perception of acidity in a wine, which can often make it appear to be rounder and fuller in the mouth. And there's an interesting logic that applies to that interaction of food and wine, both of which have a natural structure, which we understand: acidity, sweetness, saltiness, bitterness, or in the case of wine, tannin. And then more recent understanding is the category of umami, which is now widely understood. But these are attributes in food that can be enhanced with the different types of wine, or can ruin a wine if misapplied. But either way, a little knowledge and experience can make for some very happy experimenting.
Yes, absolutely. And I think you've touched on one of the features of Italian wine, where acidity is such an important element in the wines. And one reason why, as you say, Italian wines from all over tend to be enjoyed almost entirely and go so well with the cuisines.
Yes, precisely so. They lend themselves. And then, when you throw yourself into Italian wine and food, you can do so with such a level of confidence because each region has done the experimenting, the footwork to come up with these delicious traditional, historically sociocultural combinations. But once you've got those, then there's every opportunity to go off-piste nowadays and explore with abandon. And some combinations just may be a bit more adventurous. But I love Italy because of and France and all these areas where food and wine are so integral to the cultural history. So it's something that we living in the UK admire and are just beginning to follow and appreciate properly, and then develop some of our own.
Yes, absolutely. You're exactly right, though, how tradition has been built on these natural combinations that work so well, but then using that as a sort of platform
Exactly.
to explore and experiment. And that's why a lot of Italian restaurants today are doing such exciting things.
Absolutely wonderful. And then the excitement when you find an unusual combination and it just trampolines the flavors exponentially. There's everything to play for. And I think what's lovely now is that we're casting off the rules and regulations that red has to go with meat, et cetera, all those old fashioned combinations, and exploring with gay abandon. There isn't any social strictures that are being applied anymore. So the opportunities are far greater.
Yes, absolutely. Now, Nancy, I can tell us immediately when we begin our conversation how the world of food is of equal interest to you as the world of wine. But tell us a little bit about yourself. What brought you into the world of wine, and what compelled you to study to become one of the small number of the world's elite masters of wine? Was it a lengthy process you underwent? And
Yes.
what's that mean to you being a master of wine?
It means just the hugest amount to me. It was a very lengthy procedure, but it was one of those procedures that once started, I simply could not let go because it is persistently fascinating. It's a remarkable world that unites geography, botany, chemistry, law, culture, sociology. I mean, you name it, it's all in there. It's changing rapidly. There's a wonderful generosity of spirit amongst the brotherhood, the fraternity of wine, precisely because the concept of terroir exists. And it's recognized that you simply cannot replicate the same wine anywhere else in the world, because it depends intimately on the precise microclimatic variables that exist in that particular plot. And what I especially love about it is the way there is an essential truth to every well-made wine. It cannot be anything other than it is because of where it comes from. And I really appreciate that recognition of place, of time through weather and climate, and then, of course, the element of skill as a result of the knowledge of the producer. But what sparked it all for me, gosh, it goes way back. I mean, really, I think I was a most unusual child. I started to be interested when I was 11.
Oh my.
It was a mixture of two things. One was I've always loved maps, and it was when Hugh Johnson's World Atlas of Maps first came out. So I owe a huge debt of gratitude to him, to that wonderful man who's been a constant influence and inspiration. And the other thing that came into play was that my father was a diplomat, and my parents had to do a lot of entertaining. And my father managed to involve me when we were living in a rather boring posting for an 11-year-old, in the ceremony of decanting wine. And of course, it was at a time when you could soak the labels off the bottles before these had to be glued on ad infinitum. So in a rather stamp collectory sort of way, I started to collect the labels and then put them in order according to Hugh Johnson's World Atlas. And so actually I ended up learning quite a lot. And so when I went on to university, I got involved, but I never ever thought it was going to be anything more than a serious interest. And then I was involved in publishing, but came back. I still was writing about wine, and I had a most unusual interview when I was married, and we moved to Boston. And it happened at a time when they had just sadly lost their wine correspondent. And so, with the sheer cheek of youth, I wrote to the editor and said, I'm very sorry to see it looks as if you've lost your wine columnist. Would you like somebody to fill in? And he invited me to an interview. It's probably the shortest I think I've ever had. All I remember him asking me, he said, and what book are you reading? And I said, The Great Railway Bazaar. And he said, oh, okay, fine, off you go. And from then on, while I was living in Boston, I had two
Boston,
jobs.
USA.
Boston, USA. And I was able to do that because I was half American at the time. So there we have it. That led to that. And then by the time we moved back to the UK, I thought, now I'm a bit schizophrenic. I think I really must decide whether I'm going to carry on in publishing or whether I'm going to go full time into wine. And I opted for wine for the sheer joy and interest and flexibility and long-termness of it. I just thought, what's not to like about it? And it's then that I continued to write for magazines like Wine and Decanter, but I also joined an operation called the Grants of St. James's School of Wine, and eventually ended up running that and running courses all over the UK. That's when I discovered how much I enjoyed educating, because it was at a time when people didn't know what Chardonnay was. They didn't recognize Pinot Noir or Cabernet Sauvignon.
When are we talking about, Nancy?
So we're talking about the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And I'm talking about general public, but it was also at a time when the pubs were moving from the sawdust floors, which still existed at the time, which really sounds so antiquated now, but were moving into becoming bistros and up quality. And so I did a lot of training in the trade, particularly for Allied Lion and Whitbread. I feel like I've followed the true arc of wine education, at least in the UK, from just about the beginning to where we are now. And that is an arc that's taken about 40 years.
Well, that's really, really interesting, Nancy. And it's not dissimilar to my own arc. And indeed, Hugh Johnson's World Atlas of Wine was an inspiration for me and Kim when we were just beginning our books. And I had the chance to do a podcast with Hugh. I've never actually met him. Told him about that. He explained to me how his interest in maps and his interest in wine led him to that idea to do the World Atlas. So it was nice to be able to thank him for the way he inspired so many of us.
Yes, exactly. I feel the same. You need to go and sort of bend the knee a little bit. Plus the fact that what a wonderful man, because he's also written this glorious book on the World Atlas of Trees. And
yes,
so a combination
right.
of the two, you know.
He writes so beautifully that I'd read anything that he writes about. Now, Nancy, Italy, just in the last week, I think Christina Mercury became first Italian female master of wine to join Gabriele, Andrea, and Pietro, the other three Italian masters of wine. When you were studying to become a master of wine, I know there are quite a few female masters of wine now around the world, but when you were studying, I mean, there's still such a limited number of masters of wine, 400 something, I think. Was it more of a male-dominated world? Was it difficult for you to break into that world? Because you're going back to when wine was still very different here in the UK.
Yes, yes. Without doubt, it was very male-dominated. I think I was the 32nd female master of wine. But as I recall it, it was a very gentlemanly environment, old school. But if you were happy to play by those rules, it was an extremely giving arena in which to learn. I think it's part and parcel of the people who opt to follow the Master of Wine line of inquiry because it requires endless curiosity and the determination to ask endless questions. But for that curiosity to be satisfied, it requires a lot of very generous people to be happy to sit down and answer those questions. And that's what I found when I was studying. And I had a couple of excellent women inspirations, two of which, Angela Muir was one, and Maggie McNee another, both of whom were just the most splendid, formidable women who taught me such a lot about tasting wine. And I always remember Maggie saying that, and I said, you're such a good teacher. And she said, oh, well, if I am, it's because I found the Master of Wine tasting paper so very difficult. She didn't get it first time. And it is often that way. It's the people who've had to struggle and make really conscious efforts to find the cornerstones of knowledge and the points that help trigger the memories. So I always think of her anytime I would smell a muscat wine from Samos. And I always remember that Maggie McNee saying, if it ever smells of orange marmalade, then you know it's muscat from Samos. And pretty much that's been the case. It's been a little while now since I've tasted one, so I dare say maybe there are other nuances in it. But anyway, that was one of those helpful aids in gaining the confidence that you need to trust your instincts.
Yes, yes. I think you've touched on something that I think many of us working in the world of wine would agree with, that it's such a welcoming community. People who work in wine love to share their passions and enthusiasms and share their knowledge. So I've learned immensely from so many people over the years who've given generous time and wines and
it's an overused word, but it's so appropriate for wine, is passion. It's just everybody involved is passionate about it because there's always something new to learn. And you often hear winemakers bemoaning the fact that they only have one bite of the cherry every year, unless they become flying winemakers and they hop down to another hemisphere, down or up as we perceive it, in order to attempt another harvest 6 months later. But with wine, there are so many variables that you can tweak and address, and it's the love that goes into it. It's the understanding of the origin of where the grapes have come from. It's listening to what your ancestors did before. It's using the science that's available at the time and also following your gut. I think there's a lot of inspirational winemaking out there.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I'm curious to know, when you were entering in the world of wine, what your main areas of interest in the world of wine were and how you came into the world of Italian wine. I know you've just returned from Verona, but that's another subject we'll touch on. But I'm just interested in your Italian wine journey.
Oh, well, it really, I suppose that the deep dive into Alto Adige came about partly by luck and partly because I adore hiking. I love walking up in the Alps in particular. Then the opportunity came up, and Alto Adige, the Consorzio Vini Alto Adige, was looking for a UK ambassador, and I was just extremely fortunate to have my name put forward. Hit it off with the wonderful people there because they really are innovative, organized, delightful to work with, and imaginative. They're really creative in how they're trying to bring the wines of their region to the outside world, and in our case, to the UK. So I had 10 very, very happy years working with them. And then in the latter few years, they won an EU grant to fund a series of tastings around the UK together with the wines of Etna and those of Parmigiano. So they grow, cheese, obviously. And so that's how the two combinations, and so mountains and the joy of being at different altitudes, and then this combination through the EU funding have led to particular interest in these regions.
Oh, that's
And I
interesting.
think their areas are going to continue to be of deep fascination because, not just because of the quality and diversity of the oils that each regions produce, but because both regions have what could be considered a trump card in terms of altitude. And in the face of climate change, I think altitude is really going to play a very significant role in the next few decades.
Yes, I'm sure you're right. And it's interesting how on Etna, the vines keep getting planted higher and higher, even beyond the limits of the existing DOC up into the highest. Now, I think Valle d'Aosta used to boast that they were the highest vineyards in Europe, but I think some of the vineyards on Etna may even be going a little bit above 1,200 meters. So I'm sure you're right. It's been such extremes in recent years. I think last year was a little bit more back to normal.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't so many decades ago that I remember Jancis Robinson was writing that, 500 meters is the highest reasonable limit that we can expect to be able to produce quality wine. And now we're well up, as you say, up to 1,000 meters in both on Etna and in Alto Adige. So
Yes,
the times they are changing.
they are indeed, and challenging times for wine growers.
Extremely, yeah.
Nancy, I'd like to turn our attention away from wine, but to another one of your great loves. I think something that perhaps I'm sure you'll confirm has a lot of similarities with the world of wine, and that's, of course, the world of extra virgin olive oil. What made you find this other world, the world of olive oil, so attractive and compelling that you're really becoming a specialist in, you are a specialist in extra virgin olive oils, and not just from one source, but from around the world?
And I think you're quite right to say becoming, because we're always becoming a specialist. There's always more to learn. But the answer to that is foods that have origin. And so whether that was wine, which was my main line of inquiry, or it was olive oil, or it was chocolate, or even in a very minor way, I was looking at honey and tea and coffee. All of these things hold a fascination because they reflect their background. So I did spend some very happy times working with chocolate, but olive oil has gained my particular attention in more recent years because there are echoes of what I remember the world of wine feeling like when I started out. So I mentioned right at the beginning that when I first started looking at teaching about wine, very few people in the general public knew or recognized what Chardonnay was. And in the world of olive oil, more and more producers are moving away from producing just blends of different olives to producing what they call monocultivars or single varietal olive oils. And so it's now very easy to find on the market single olive oils made out of the main Spanish olive, Picual, or then some of the most widely available olives, which are indigenous to Italy, like Frantoio, for example, now widely planted around the world. Arbequina, going back to Spain, another widely planted olive grown around the world, but indigenous originally to Spain. And these you can find in individual bottlings, not just in the case of Arbequina or Frantoia from their indigenous countries, but also from South Africa, from California, from Australia. This has got so many similarities to the way wine felt. It was the catalyst that allowed people, I think, to feel a level of confidence that they could explore the world of wine by pursuing Chardonnay in different parts of the country or around the world, or Pinot Noir, or whatever it was. And I think the same is going to apply to olive oil. So having spent over 40 years in the world of wine, I thought actually it would be really fun to start at the beginning with olive oil at the point where it's really beginning to gain traction. And there's another reason, which again, people are beginning to recognize the undeniable health attributes that olive oil can bring. And more research is proving that not only is olive oil proven to reduce cardiac problems, blood pressure, and cholesterol. And in fact, it's actually allowed by EU regulations to put a statement to that effect on the bottle of extra virgin olive oil. But there's also a lot of research to suggest that it has very beneficial effects against diabetes and controlling diabetes, arthritis, Alzheimer's and other areas of dementia, and even different types of cancer, most particularly breast cancer. And so these are undeniably exciting areas. And if that happens to come with delicious flavor and sociocultural history that allows you to explore a joyful world in beautiful parts of the world, then I'm definitely up for that.
Wow, that's a really wonderful way to hear how you were inspired to expand your expertise into this fascinating world of olive oil. And I'm interested too, Nancy, that you say that it was really the terroir element that you found so interesting. And I'm just thinking that that maybe you need to be working on, and maybe you are working on, a world atlas of olive oil in the same way that Hugh brought the world of wine.
Would that I were a Hugh Johnson. Yes, maybe it's early days, because when I first World Atlas of Wine, which came out in the early 70s, I recall had, half a page on South Africa, half a page, or maybe a whole page on California, half a page on New Zealand. And at the moment, that would probably apply to olive oil, and the rest would be taken up with, not surprisingly, with Spain, the world's largest producer of olive oil, followed by Italy, followed by Greece. It is fascinating. It's worth doing. But if I have a few more extra decades, then I might apply myself to that.
Actually, you're right. I think the first edition, it's sitting right here on my bookshelf next to me, the cover completely falling off. I think mine was 1976, and there was a very short section on Italy, just half a dozen pages, I think. And I'm sure you're right. But I think the important thing, Nancy, is that you're pointing out the individuality of well-made, artisan-made,
exactly,
extra virgin olive oil, which is a result of varieties, whether in blend or single monocultivars,
exactly.
the terroir, and the methods of production, the moment of picking, which could affect acidity. And I know there's still producers using the stone mills to grind the olives and press, but also there's some super modern and very, very good new machines. So all of those make it such a fascinating subject.
They really do. And there's just one point on acidity levels, which is so often, as you quite rightly mention, is an issue with especially extra virgin olive oil. And it's so frequently referred to. But it is worth just highlighting the fact that we're not talking about pH acidity. We are talking about oleic acidity. And in terms of the stability and general quality, they're not directly related, but in order for it to qualify as an extra virgin olive oil, an oil must be lower in oleic acidity than 0.8 grams per 100 grams of olive oil.
Okay, that is a very important point, because we relate acidity to, say, acidity in wine, which is different.
It is indeed, yeah, it is very different. Yes, so as you say, becoming an olive oil specialist, there's always so much to learn, but those factors are written in stone and have been such for a long time. What is changing so very rapidly and makes me even more enthusiastic about this new venture is the fact that there are so many essential changes taking place at the production end. So now most producers are beginning to recognize that the quantity and quality are two completely different issues. In the past, olives used to be harvested late in order to get maximum quantity. But in order to get the freshest aromas and flavors and the highest magical polyphenols, which are the health giving attributes of olive oil, one needs to pick the olives earlier. And so that's a visible change, a tangible change in the approach to olive oil production that has made a dramatic impression and increase in the quality that's being produced at a very basic level. Other things that are at a very basic level but are making a really significant difference is the level of hygiene and the speed at which olives are being processed. So again, in the past, it used to be very much a family endeavor, and they might harvest on a Friday evening or over a Saturday, and then take the olives to a mill, and then the olives would sit in a Hessian sack in the forecourt in the high sun over the rest of the weekend, and only be processed by the cooperative olive mill sometime on Monday, by which time many of the olives would have already begun to oxidize, and off flavors and mustiness and winey elements would have come in. So you've automatically got a below par olive oil on your hands. But if you can process it within 24 hours, ideally within 4 to 6 hours of harvesting, then again, automatically you have a much higher quality olive oil. And then
Okay.
basic hygiene. Now that stainless steel is so much more widely used in the milling process, as opposed to the traditional mills, which would use a grinding stone. I'm not saying that you can't get good quality oil produced in that fashion if it's very carefully handled, but that is the crucial thing. It has to be very carefully handled. So by and large, stainless steel and hygiene have gone hand in hand, and that's also helped. And then finally, the understanding and recognition that temperature also makes a huge difference in not only the quality of the oil and the level of stability that the oil achieves, but also in eliciting the more subtle nuances in both aroma and in flavor. So there are some
So
fairly
many
fundamental
factors.
things. Yeah, they're fairly fundamental things that are just beginning to change in a widespread way.
Yes, and that's, yeah, I can totally appreciate that precision that goes into making the best oils. But
Mm.
I'm also thinking, Nancy, about when you were first excited about wine and what really excited you, and perhaps moments that wines that you still remember now. And I'm thinking as well that for me, the first taste of the new oil each year, ideally we're visiting a frantoio and tasting that almost as it comes out of the centrifuge, as special and as exciting to me as the first taste of a new wine, which again is a moment I still love every year. And does olive oil give you that excitement in the same way?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of these rare things because the olive, of course, is a fruit. And along with avocados, these are the two fruit oils that are produced. Everything else is sort of seeds and nuts and such. But so when it's pressed and it comes out sometimes in the most glorious colors, I mean, just
Yes.
ranging from the most vibrant yellows through golds to the intense gem-like greens. I mean, they really are visibly delicious, but you can consume them straight away, even before they've got to tank, before they've got to bottle. And there is something very joyful about that, just having it straight from the olive one end, oil out the other end. It's as basic as it comes. And it just goes to show that the skill not only exists in the mill for the producer, but has to start, absolutely has to start in the grove, because once you've picked those olives, the quality is inbuilt. There's nothing more you can add. You can't add oak. You can't do malolactic fermentation. You can blend different types of olives to create a blend, of course, but it is what it is. And to taste that from one end of the mill to the other, which will usually take less than an hour, is a very exciting sort of magic trick almost, bringing the rabbit out of the hat.
That's right. And also that catch in your throat, that
Ah,
pepperiness,
yeah.
it's such a hallmark, almost to make one cough, and it takes you by surprise that.
Yeah, it's one of those sort of ceremonies that one goes through, and everyone shares the joy and the joke of the cough. Of course, that piquancy at the back of the throat, which is caused by the polyphenols, as I mentioned again, the health-giving attributes of olive oil, and the polyphenols are at their highest level immediately after pressing, and thereafter they will begin to decline gently, steadily throughout the natural life of an olive oil. They will decline more slowly if the oil is stored in the dark, in a cool temperature like a wine cellar would be absolutely ideal. And if they're kept away from oxygen, then they'll last long. And a very high level of polyphenol, which by regulation is classified as anything over 250 grams. But I mean, there are many polyphenol levels that go up to 700, 800, 900,
Oh my
even
goodness. Wow.
1,000. And those will tend to decline slowly over a period, not just of 1 year, but they can be perfectly in good quality 2 years. But ideally, the real key message with olive oil is freshest is best. And in which case, as you rightly point out, you are likely to be coughing a little bit, but it's a pleasant cough to know that it's actually doing you good. And I haven't had a cold really since I started to taste olive oil.
Oh my, that's an added benefit. Nancy, can we turn to the world of Italian extra virgin olive oil? I mean, like the grapevine, olive cultivars are found in almost every region of Italy. I'm just thinking, Nancy, that perhaps not in Valle d'Aosta, but I can't think of any other region where they're not.
There are just one or two beginning in Valle d'Aosta, but
Oh my.
I have not visited, but it is an area which I tend to go to because it's alpine. So there are, and in Piedmont, and but it's a very early stage. So I would like to report back on that and let
Okay,
you
well,
know.
we'll have another conversation. Can you describe some of the broader regional differences in Italian extra virgin oils?
Mm.
Again, from north to south.
That's a tricky question because it's not entirely intuitive. You might think that olive oils from the northern climates, which would be slightly cooler, the higher latitudes, might be slightly more piquant and
Such as Lake Garda.
Lake Garda and around Liguria. But in fact, the olives that grow there, so the Tadgescu from Liguria and the Casaliva, typically from the area around Lake Garda, are two of the mildest of olives.
Oh, interesting.
And it's when you get down to the south in Puglia, in particular, so around the heel, the foot of the boot, that you get one of the highest levels of intensity in olive oil, and that's the Corotina.
Nancy, would that be from the huge olive trees that are as big as oak trees that sadly have suffered some diseases in Puglia in recent
Yes,
years?
the Xylella fastidiosa sounds like a magic spell, doesn't it? But it's a sort of a similar effect, a little bit like phylloxera, although happily, I think and hope that the spread won't be so devastating because they believe they may have found an antibacterial agent indigenous to the olive trees that will counteract it. So early days yet, but it has been, as you say, devastating in the areas, particularly in Puglia. And millions of trees have been cut down by way of a fire break to protect the rest of the country. But yes, it's the Corotina that is down there. There are others because there are hundreds of olive varieties that exist in Italy. And interestingly, now that the monocultivar trend has taken root, more individual old ancestor olive varieties are finding their way to market. So when you go exploring, you will have the opportunity to taste not just dozens, but there are hundreds out there. And I think one of the reasons why more producers are producing some of the older individual varieties is not just out of natural curiosity and inquisitiveness, but it's also possibly by way as a shoring option against the potential of climate change, because none of us truly understand exactly how these extremes of temperature are going to influence the olives that we have at the moment. So the more options, the more eggs you have in more baskets, the better it will be.
That's really interesting. And perhaps these older varieties from old trees, like with the vine, with old vines and traditional varieties that had been perhaps fallen by the wayside because of they weren't as productive or for other reasons.
Yes, exactly that. Yeah.
And what about those exquisite and elegant and very expensive extra virgin olive oils from Tuscany and Umbria?
Yeah. So Tuscany is, well, as we all know from the wine, is such a stylish area to visit and just uh, effortlessly beautiful, isn't it? What is interesting is that many of those top quality wine producers also produce olive oil. And in fact, I was having this conversation with one of them just a few days ago in Verona at the Sol Expo 2026. And he was saying that the reason that he'd gone into monocultivar, which was actually back in the 1990s, he was saying, so he's been a very early proponent, was that there he was as a winemaker, and he knew the detail of his vineyards and his grapes and his wine production to the nth degree. And then he just went away and made his olive oil. And he thought, why am I just not focusing on the olive oil in the same way that I focus on my wine? And so that started for him, this whole procedure. And you can see the curiosity just burning there. You know, you're thinking, well, the what ifs and all the other questions that come into one's mind when you're thinking about wine. Now the same applies to olive oil. And it's just a delight to find more and more people turning to examine their olive oil production in the same way. So it's coming under a different lens, a different microscope. And I think as the general consumer, we are going to witness a really exciting development in the evolution of styles, quality, and diversity of oils that we have out there. So, some of the very best olive oil producers in the world, as recognized not only by the multitude of different international competitions, but also by their peers. I hesitate to single out particulars unless you definitely want that, but having visited many of them, it's fascinating because you have this really in-depth conversation and then you dance around the details because of course they don't want to quite at this stage give away their exact speed of malaxing, which is the blending of the paste and the temperature at which they do it at and all these things, because they're experimenting too. But you know that they are working the mill. In fact, I remember one mill master telling me that he now feels that he can play his mill like a violin.
Oh my goodness.
It's absolutely wonderful. So you can picture these wonderful people standing, you know, and this can go well into the early hours of the morning because the harvest, when the olives come in, the olives have to be processed and they can't stop until the last batch has been processed through the mill. And so it's an exhausting time for them. And you can tell that some of them have been doing, you know, burning the midnight oil, but they're there because they don't just see that batch of olives all processed through at the same temperature, at the same speed, at exactly the same handling. No, no, no. They recognize from it that these ones were particularly early harvested, or maybe they come from higher up the hill on the slope. These ones need different handling from those that were lower down in the slope. And this sort of attention to detail I find absolutely fascinating. And it just sparks my enthusiasm to want to know more and how it influences the finished product and how we can anticipate that in future harvests. So it's an endlessly fascinating subject.
That is really fascinating as one delves into these finer details. This is a hugely general question, Nancy, but just some advice for our listeners. Extra virgin olive oil, the good stuff, is expensive. So, what are some of the ways that you advise our listeners to be using it in the kitchen?
Um,
I know that's a subject of another book for you.
That's right. I know, in all these extra decades, you're quite right. Well, to put one myth to bed, I hope, olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, can very happily be used for cooking. The myth about burn points, it's much higher than many have led us to believe. And so good quality olive oil can be used for frying without any danger of causing anything carcinogenic and such. However, as you rightly point out, very good extra virgin olive oil is indeed very expensive. So I personally only use my sort of entry level extra virgin olive oil for cooking in general, but using the top quality stuff for finishing the dish. This is where the same logic that applies to wine and food, because we don't have that pH level of acidity in olive oil to play with. We don't have tannins in the same way. But I'm exploring this, and I think everybody else who comes into this arena has their own individual approach to explore equally. There are no written rules other than maybe by way of guideline to suggest that the most intense olive oils go with meat, whereas the most delicate olive oils will go at the other end of the scale, the spectrum, and would be used in mayonnaise and vinaigrette and on fish. But then within those categories, delicate, medium, intense, there is a whole world of aroma and flavor as well. And that's where empirical experimentation needs to come into play. So, yes, over the next few years, this is an area I'm going to be looking at with great interest, partly because it's an addition to a dish. It doesn't get subsumed. It's an ancillary attribute to a dish. And one of the most delightful attributes is that when you add an olive oil to a warm dish, whether it's a peasant soup of some sort, whether it's vegetables or whether it's meat, is the aroma just that explodes and perfumes the immediate area around it, up your nose and over the table, is just electrifying. It's just such an added dimension to the pleasure of consuming these olive oils.
Yes, that drizzle that you put
Ah,
on
yeah,
a
I know, isn't it?
table.
Yeah.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean.
And visually, they look so good. I mean, yeah, it is definitely food for all the senses.
Yes, absolutely. Now, final question, Nancy. I know you've been a wine educator for much of your career, and wine education is available widely for consumers as well as professionals. But if anyone wants to learn more about the world of extra virgin olive oil, both consumers and professionals, what is the best way? Are there olive oil tasting events in the way that you've done wine tasting events, for example? What would you advise people?
Right. Well, it is quite early days. There are events that are led and run by producers coming to the country, and the different wholesalers, the merchants that bring them in, do an excellent job there. But of course, their time is mostly taken up in trying to get the wines out to market and to retail. So in the past, this is where I have to give a very particular salute to Judy Ridgway, who has been a lone voice in, one might say, the wilderness previously, because she, over decades, and since the last 30 years or more, has been running olive oil classes. And Judy has been immensely generous in sharing her expertise with me and encouraging me to go into this area. So this is something which I'm just beginning to launch after Easter, and will be conducting through cookery schools actually maybe wine societies, because I feel that people who are already interested in wine will understand the general parameters of olive oil. We already halfway speak the same language. And then to epicure centres, foodie centres, where the interest in food itself and the exploration of the food attributes around the world is available.
Well, Nancy, that's really, really fascinating. And I think you're right. People will want to know more. How do they find out about your tastings? Can they go to your website? What is your website that they should go to?
That's very kind of you. Yes. So my website is called mattersoftaste.co.uk. And just gives you an opportunity to do contact. It's got my details and a little bit about my background and what I'm hoping to do. So mattersoftaste.co.uk.
Okay, well, Nancy, it's been so fascinating, really delving in some depth into the world of both wine, but especially your current passion and knowledge that you shared with us about this fascinating world of extra virgin olive oil, a world I've dipped into. We lived on one of those Tuscan wine estates that made wine and also olive oil. And we used to go to buy our oil, and it was still in the orcho, the terracotta vessel that was
Yeah.
like in Roman days, scooped out with a ladle and just hand bottled. And it was such a wonderful treat
Isn't
to
it? Oh,
simply
yes.
toast bread and drizzle it on that unsalted Tuscan
Making
bread
my
with
mouth water.
it was such a treat, and we've been addicted ever since. So I've learned a lot from our conversation and really enjoyed it. So thank you very much for being my guest today.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. Thank you very much for asking me.
Well, I look forward to meeting you again soon, Nancy, possibly down here in Topsham.
That would be great. Yes, and I'm thankful to Marianne for introducing us. So two clever people have obviously chosen the right spot.
Well, thank you very much and hope to see you soon.
All right. Thanks, Marc. Thanks very much.
We hope today's episode of Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on the Italian Wine Podcast has transported you to somewhere special. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your pods. Likewise, you can visit us at italianwinepodcast.com. Until next time, chin chin.